In this story, I'm going to tell you how I discovered the man my mother trusted was quietly siphoning her savings, and how I unmasked him without a dramatic showdown. I followed a receipt, mapped a pattern of transfers to shell companies, and quietly built a file that left no room for charm or excuses. But I didn't call the police or scream at him. Instead, I baited him with a small, ordinary transfer, watched him show up at a mailbox on camera, and turned his own bravado into the proof that froze his access and gave my mother her life back. Stay with me. I'll show the exact moves I made, the mistakes that almost ruined everything, and the one clever trap that ended it all. I am Maya Bennett, 29, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I work as a graphic designer at a small, sustainable packaging company downtown, where my days are measured in Pantone swatches and the comforting hum of the recycling bin. I am the kind of person who notices small details, the way color changes in autumn light, how a barista folds a paper sleeve, the little habits people do when they are nervous. Those small things have always been my map. I grew up in a noisy house where everyone had an opinion, so I learned early to keep to myself and to make peace by keeping the chores done and the counters clear. Quiet became my refuge and observation my language. My mother, Diane, raised me alone after my father left when I was 6. She is the kind of person who speaks her mind and never pretends things are easy. She taught me to be practical, to save for a rainy day, to always ask questions. She also taught me that family is everything, even when it hurts. For most of my life, that meant I put my mother first, scheduling repairs, holding dinner conversations together, letting her voice be the loudest in the room, even when her choices made me uncomfortable. Her laugh could fill a room. Her stubbornness could fill it too. Lately, things had been different. Diane started dating again after a long string of lonely years. At first, I was relieved. She deserved someone who showed up on time and could fix the leaky sink. Then I met Mark at a Sunday dinner after one of their hikes. He was charming in that used car salesman way, his laugh too loud, his compliments too rehearsed. He told stories about his business, about his investments, and how he always knew the right people. He called Diane darling with a casual intimacy that made me clench my jaw. I tried to be open-minded. Diane was happy. That should have been enough. It was not. One evening, while helping them clear up after dinner, I found a receipt tucked under a placemat for an expensive tablet repair. The repair shop name was one I recognized. Someone at work had mentioned it when their partner was scammed months earlier. The total on the receipt was $2,000. When I asked Diane about it, she smiled and said Mark had taken care of it and waved it away. My father's absence made me oversensitive to anyone who looked like they might take advantage of the people I loved. A quiet suspicion grew in me that Mark was not the supportive man he pretended to be, but someone who used charm to get what he wanted. I started watching. I listened to the little ways Mark managed his sentences so Diane would laugh at the right moments. I noticed he volunteered to pay for household items that were not broken, and then suggested they shop together so he could help find better deals. Every so often, Diane would come to me with worries about money and apologize as if she had done something wrong. Her apologies sliced deeper than they should have. I had always carried the steady weight of making sure our family stayed afloat, and here was a man whose generosity had a strange price. One night, I borrowed a moment to look through a drawer where Diane kept extra warranties and receipts. I know that sounds invasive, but when you suspect someone is bilking the person you love, it is hard to sleep. Tucked behind a stack of old insurance papers, I found a folder of bank transfers to a business name that kept recurring, a shell name I did not recognize. The transfers were regular and timed right after Diane and Mark had gone out together. That was the moment the world tilted. The problem was real. My mother was losing money, and the man she loved was the one taking it. He had become my nemesis, a smiling predator who used ease with words to lull people into trust. I felt a rage that mixed with the old instinct to protect and the modern urge to make things right. I could have confronted Mark outright where everyone could see the sparks fly. Instead, I spent 2 weeks building quiet proof. I printed bank statements and receipts, matched dates, and texted a friend who used to work as an accountant to see if the transfer pattern looked like laundering. It did. The more I learned, the more the problem swelled. This was not a few small thefts, but something systematic. I was angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, angry at Diane for trusting him, and terrified at how much she could lose. I kept my cards close because once you say something, you cannot take it back. For all her stubbornness, Diane was still my mother, and I knew she would not respond well to what I had to do next. I tried to fix the problem the way we had always fixed things in our family, by talking, by giving people a chance to explain. I invited Diane to brunch under the pretense of wanting to spend an afternoon with her. We walked the East Bank Esplanade, and she told me about Mark's childhood and how he had vowed never to be lonely again. She said he had never asked for anything from her, that he just liked to take care of her. I listened and swallowed the urge to show her the evidence. Instead, I asked gentle questions about money and subtle nudges about keeping joint finances separate. Diane laughed and said she trusted him because she knew his past and because she had never felt condescended to. I pushed a little, asking if she had ever worried that someone might be using charm to hide something. She shook her head and said, "People are not that cruel, Maya." That phrase haunted me. After brunch, I tried another tactic. I called Mark on the pretense of needing a friendly favor. He answered warmly and casually and said he could drop by with a spare battery for my old phone. He walked into my apartment with the ease of a man who had practiced being welcome. I kept the conversation light and asked about his work, the names of his vendors, the way he did business. I could feel him testing me, watching my face for weaknesses. He told me a story about a big client who had stiffed him and how he was trying to patch things financially by investing in quick flips. I pretended to be impressed and let it go. After he left, I called a local repair shop I trusted and asked if they had done work for Mark's business. They said they had not. I widened the net and called 2 other shops. The answers were the same. My plan was not yet to burn everything down. I wanted to give Mark a chance to prove himself or to make a mistake so clear that Diane would have no excuse left. Instead, I found myself making mistakes. I tried to manipulate little things to see how he would react. I added an extra key to my spare key set and forgot a policy folder at Diane's place that mentioned joint accounts. Once, in a reckless moment, I sent a text from my own phone to Mark that hinted I knew something about his transfers. I did not think through the consequences. The reply arrived 2 minutes later, a short, unnerving message that read, "Funny, some people are better at protecting their own." The text felt like a slap, and I realized I had given him a taste of the game. From that point on, things escalated. Mark began to show up more often at Diane's, always with that bright smile, always with a knowing look. He adjusted his voice when I entered a room the way predators do when they show a cat they are still in charge. I could tell he had grown suspicious because he tightened the circle around Diane and started to reroute their financial trail, using cash more and leaving fewer traces. I tried to keep my cool, but my little missteps now felt like I had told the fox where the henhouse was. The problem ballooned into a risk not just of money, but of open confrontation. I found myself losing sleep over receipts and bank statements. I stopped answering my friends when they asked if I wanted to go out. I watched my mother through the windows as if I were staking out a museum piece. The worst moment came when, one evening, Diane called me sounding shaky. She told me Mark had been angry after a fight about money and that he had hinted she was forgetful, clumsy, and unfit to manage bills. Her voice broke when she said she felt small. I went over immediately, and Mark left with a grin that looked like a victory. I wanted to scream at him then and there, to show him the folder of proof I had in my bag, but I did not. I realized I had gone too far down a path of stealth and that my miscalculations had made him close ranks. I had made him wary, and that made him dangerous. For a week I thought I had lost everything. I considered turning over the documents to the police, but what if Diane denied it? What if the evidence was not enough without her testimony? The legal route felt like throwing my mother into a courtroom where her life would be rewritten by strangers. I almost accepted defeat. Then I remembered something Diane had told me long ago when I was a child. We use our heads first, then our fists. I decided to use my head again. I would have one last attempt, carefully planned, to unmask Mark in a way that would not humiliate my mother, but would leave Mark exposed enough that he could not easily recover. If I failed, I knew everything could collapse. Diane could lose savings, Mark could slip away, and my quiet life could blow apart. But if I succeeded, we could reclaim what was stolen and teach him a lesson he would not forget. For the final act, I needed allies. I started by confiding in one person I trusted without question. My brother, Lucas. He is 3 years younger, a software engineer who still remembers our childhood as a series of shared forts and scraped knees. He had a quiet intensity that showed up in his small apartment, piles of obscure tech magazines, a meticulously labeled spice drawer, a whiteboard that always had one more diagram than you expected. When I told him everything, from the receipt to the transfers, and showed him the spreadsheet I had built mapping out the money, he did not flinch. Instead, he leaned in, tracing the lines with a coffee-stained finger and asking technical questions about patterns. His curiosity felt like fuel rather than judgment. He suggested an approach that used his skills, digital surveillance that would not cross legal lines, but would help us time mark to certain locations and transactions. The plan felt like a late-night project we'd do in college. Mischievous, precise, and a little terrifying. Lucas wrote a simple script that pulled publicly available business registration data and cross-referenced it with the names Mark used. He worked in bursts, muttering at the screen, then celebrating quietly when a connection appeared. He discovered that several of the vendors Mark claimed he used were actually registered under shell names that traced back to a single mailbox service 2 neighborhoods over. It was a small lead, but it was the kind of crooked seam that, once pulled, might unravel everything. We mapped the shell names to dates and to the times transfers hit Diane's accounts. The pattern emerged like a constellation, regular points that only made sense when connected. We still needed something sharper, proof that the transfers originated from Diane's accounts or that Mark had directed them. Lucas and I set up a plan that relied on psychology as much as technology. I knew Mark loved to be seen as generous and to brag about his connections. We decided to bait him with his own weakness, attention. I told Diane I wanted to surprise her with a small thank you for being my mother and for teaching me to be careful with money. She loved the idea and thought I was buying a modest wellness retreat. Instead, I booked a day workshop in the East Hills and arranged for us to be out for 8 hours. Before we left, I moved a small sum into an account Diane had set up years earlier and rarely used, an account for emergency home repairs that Mark did not know about because he assumed he could handle everything. The transfer was small enough to seem ordinary, but it was enough to trigger the pattern Mark had depended on. During our time away, Lucas monitored the accounts and the shell vendors. He also installed a discreet security camera at the mailbox we suspected Mark used, the same mailbox service that many shell companies used for registration. Watching him tape the tiny camera into place, I felt like a conspirator in a movie, heartbeat quick, hands steady. The bait worked. 2 days after the transfer went through, a courier appeared at the mailbox service. Mark was there with a man I did not know. He moved with the calm of someone who gambled with other people's money, efficient, practiced, unbothered. He filled envelopes, signed for packages, handed over a thick stack of notes to the man who left in a dark sedan. Lucas, from his laptop, sent me the live feed and a series of screen grabs that would make a case. I watched Mark smile into his phone, sign documents, and then step away like a man who thought himself untouchable. My stomach tightened as I realized how blatant he was when he thought no one was watching. The next step had to be public exposure without entrapment. I asked Lucas to compile a simple, clear file of dates, amounts, and the video stills of Mark at the mailbox. He cleaned up my spreadsheet, added cross-references, and exported a tidy PDF that looked like evidence rather than obsession. We took the file to Jenna, a local friend who runs a community legal clinic and has a history of helping elders with financial abuse cases. Jenna was a force. She saw the file and leaned forward like a person who smelled a wrong that needed righting. She agreed to call the bank under the pretense of being Diane and ask for a review of suspicious transfers. The bank opened a quiet inquiry, and within a week the money routing froze. When I told Diane the bank was investigating, she reacted as if a fog had lifted. Her eyes filled, but not with anger, relief and a sorrow that felt like grief for days she hadn't known she'd lost. The confrontation at the bank, organized with Jenna and a bank representative present, felt like staging a small courtroom. Mark arrived with smooth anger and practiced charm, but when Jenna walked him through the dates and the mailbox photos, his voice faltered. He tried to call transfers gifts, assistance for struggling relatives, anything to stitch the story back together. Jenna laid out the paper trail of businesses registered to Shell addresses and bank transfers that matched the pattern we had found. He sputtered, tried pet names, attempted to distract with familiarity, the same old tricks. It did not work. The bank froze linked accounts and demanded Mark resign any authorization he had on Diane's finances. He left the meeting like a man unmasked on stage, smiling the smile of someone losing control. The result was not courtroom justice, but it was practical and decisive. Diane closed the joint accounts, moved her savings to the emergency account I had topped up, and Jenna connected her with a fraud investigator. For Mark, the consequence was swift. He lost access, and within days, the leverage he'd used to shape our lives. He pushed back with guilt and slander, but the facts held. There was a small, delicious moment when Mark posted a self-pitying message on social media about betrayal. It got a few likes and several dismissive comments from mutual friends who had watched the bank meeting. I felt no joy in his humiliation. Instead, I felt the calm that follows finishing a long, careful piece of work. The quiet, exact satisfaction of protecting someone you love and of watching a mask finally come off. After the confrontation, things settled into a new normal. Diane was quiet for a few weeks, like a person who had been through bad weather and was waiting to see if the sun would return. At first, her quiet felt brittle. She moved through the house in the slow, careful way of someone who has learned every creak and is testing them anew. She started going to therapy, something she had joked she did not need, and she joined a small book club that met at the library on Thursday nights. The therapist, a steady woman named Claire, asked questions that pried open old rooms. Why she trusted so quickly, what loneliness felt like after decades of caregiving, how small kindnesses had accumulated into a ledger she never meant to balance. Diane answered in halting paragraphs and sometimes in silences that lasted long enough for the rain to start outside. The book club became less about literature and more about company. Over tea and paperback covers, she practiced saying no and learned how to listen to other people's boundaries. At home, she began to take more control. She filed paper, balanced budgets, met with the fraud investigator, and even pushed me to take a weekend off. She began to label jars in the pantry and to set alerts on her phone for bill dates, tiny acts that looked domestic but felt like reclamations. I realized then how much of my life had been consumed by this fight. I had lost some sleep and a lot of patience, but I had also gained back the taste of my old power, the knowledge that I could protect my family and that we could reinvent safety for ourselves. There were nights I still woke to the memory of Mark's grin, the way he narrowed his eyes when a story bent in his favor, but those moments became shorter. Our relationship shifted. We were still mother and daughter, but there was a new layer of mutual respect. Diane apologized for not trusting me sooner, and I apologized for listening through the lens of anger rather than concern. We laughed at small things again. She sent me a text of a crooked mended teacup she had fixed with a ribbon and wrote, "Look at my ridiculous thriftiness," and I sent back a gif of triumphant confetti. Slowly, the weight lifted. Mark kept trying to contact Diane at first, but the bank had already warned him. When he persisted, the investigator filed harassment notices. He tried to run a few desperate manipulations, hinting that he had been the one who paid for the couch and the new stove, hoping guilt would pull her back in. She sent him a single message, "Thank you for the memories, but this is over." It was a tiny line that summed up everything and felt, to both of us, like a sealed envelope. The final twist came months later when Mark tried to sign Diane up for a local community class under a fake name to win her back. The class instructor called to confirm and mentioned how careful people should be with scammers. The instructor had heard about Mark from a neighbor who had noticed he had been bragging at a barbecue about helping an older lady with investments. The neighbor found the whole thing distasteful and told the instructor it sounded like a man who liked credit for kindness. The instructor then called Diane and told her to be careful. News travels in small towns and small circles, and Mark's story did not have the heroic arc he had hoped for. He became a warning rather than a promise. As for me, I changed in ways I did not expect. The fight had sharpened something in me that was not about revenge anymore, but about agency. At first it was practical. I started volunteering at the community legal clinic Jenna ran, offering design help for their pamphlets and learning how elder fraud cases worked. I found odd satisfaction in choosing typefaces that made complicated legal steps feel readable. I used both my skills and my experience to help others who were too proud to ask for help. Reworking a brochure became, in small ways, a way of saying we will build defenses where they were missing. The clinic introduced me to clients with soft hands and furious mouths, people who wanted dignity more than pity. The revenge in the story was not a dramatic public shaming. It was a return of what was taken and a rewriting of power in our small household. There were moments of doubt, evenings when I wondered if we had been cruel in our methods or if exposing Mark had been the right choice. But then I would see Diane balancing the checkbook with a tiny smile of triumph, or catch her humming in the kitchen, and the doubts would recede. In one quiet moment, Diane and I sat on the porch and watched the rain turn the city lights into watercolor. She reached over and squeezed my hand, the kind of squeeze that held memory and relief. "You kept me safe," she said. It was the simplest sentence, but it meant that my choices had been worth it. I did not feel victorious so much as relieved, because what mattered most was that my mother had her autonomy back. Mark faded out of our lives. He tried to rewrite his image, but people remembered the bank meeting and the way Jenna had spoken, direct and unyielding. He posted a few plaintive updates that read like a man rehearsing shame, and they landed flat. In the end, he was the one who paid a price. The price of not understanding that kindness cannot be forced and that you cannot buy a person into loyalty. My mother kept a small art print I had given her years ago. She hung it back where it belonged. Life in Portland returned to its usual rhythm of coffee shops, busy bike lanes, and thunderstorms that smelled like wet pine. I learned that revenge, when it is grounded in protection and proof, can be quieter and kinder than I had imagined. I also learned that family can be the fiercest reason to be clever and relentless. The fight left its scars, but it also left a map: how to notice, how to act, and how to rebuild. We moved forward with that map pinned to the fridge. The story left me with 2 lessons I carry with me. First, I learned that protecting someone you love sometimes means using your wits and, yes, a little bit of moral gray. The path I chose was not spotless. I bent rules and watched people I did not trust until they revealed themselves. I confess there were nights I dreamed of simpler courage, of standing up in a diner and saying, "You are stealing from my mother," and letting fate sort itself out. But life rarely scripts such clean scenes. Instead, I spent long evenings piecing together spreadsheets over cold coffee, rehearsing questions in my head, and feeling the weight of every small deception I deployed. Those were not proud moments. But when I pictured Diane waking up without the knot of fear in her stomach, I know the decisions were necessary. If someone asks if I regret it, I would say I regret the nights of worry and the hours lost to paranoia, but I do not regret acting to stop harm. The ache of vigilance was a price I was willing to pay. Second, I learned that family loyalty does not mean letting others take advantage of you. Love should not make you blind to manipulation. Diane and I had always been generous to a fault. We believed in seeing the good in people first. Mark exploited that faith. Rebuilding meant teaching one another a different kind of generosity, one that included boundaries and clarity. We still speak, and yes, we still disagree over small things: what to plant in the window boxes, how to budget for a trip home to visit relatives. But beneath that is a new honesty. There are evenings now when we sit at the kitchen table with a single lamp on and talk about the mundane like it is sacred. Grocery lists, when to call the plumber, whether a repair is worth the money. We learn to talk about money the way we talk about dinner: practical, necessary, and done together. Sometimes revenge stories are about satisfying anger. This one, I realized, was about building a life back from being taken apart. The quiet revenge was not fireworks and spectacle. It was the slow, steady return of trust in ourselves and in each other. I do not look for drama anymore, but I watch more closely. There is a vigilance now that is not paranoia so much as attentiveness, a new muscle we exercise with every bill we file and every new acquaintance we vet. When people ask me what it felt like to be the person who made the call that stopped Mark, I say it felt like a knot untying. Ugly, necessary, and then, finally, peaceful. And sometimes, on rainy nights when the house smells like stew and old paper, I think of the small things I kept. The receipt that started it all, the folded spreadsheet in my drawer, the silly text he sent that showed how petulant he could be. They are talismans now, reminders that we acted, that we chose safety over silence. That, in the end, is the most honest kind of revenge. Not to delight in someone's downfall, but to reclaim what was yours and to leave a space where the person you love can live without fear.